And welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. I'm Bill Tucker, filling in for a vacationing Steve this week. Yesterday, I had the privilege of sitting down with Daniel Ruddy to discuss his new book, Theodore the Great, Conservative Crusader. I am excited for this interview because Teddy Roosevelt happens to be one of my favorite presidents of all time. We could also call him the man who was almost not president as well. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Bill. It's a pleasure.
I had a history teacher one time who talked about Teddy Roosevelt with great gusto, and she noted that he was the man that the people in the Republican Party at the time really didn't like. So they sought to get rid of him by burying him in the ugliest position possible, making him vice president, to which the leader of the Republican Party here in New York said, "Who put that idiot a heartbeat away from the presidency?" Well, we know the rest, don't we?
Yeah, well, let me say this. The leaders, the elite establishment of the Republican Party didn't like him because they were made up of party bosses and plutocrats, rich, the puppets of the robber baron elites. The rank and file of the party liked him very much. But in that generation, the political system was very corrupt, and it was controlled by party bosses. So you're absolutely right. It really is a miracle he became president, because he could have never, I don't think he could have ever become president in his own right, just because the people who controlled the Republican Party would have never allowed it. But they did, to get him out of the way in New York, where he was governor and causing a lot of problems. They kicked him upstairs, so to speak, to the vice presidency, thinking he couldn't do any harm there. But then, of course, as we know, William McKinley was assassinated and Teddy became president. It was really an act of God.
It really, as a matter of fact, was. And I can't help but reflect while you're talking about the corruption in the leadership of the Republican Party at the time. There are some people who might make the argument, in fact, that's exactly the position we're in right now in this country, with the Republican Party and the Democrats as well, that the bosses are in control.
You're so right. And in 1912, Teddy left the Republican Party. He was so disgusted because the nomination was stolen from him by the party bosses. He won most of the primaries. By rights, he should have been the Republican nominee in 1912, but the party bosses controlled the nominating process, and they rigged the convention against him, so he bolted and ran as a third-party candidate. But you're right. What he called the invisible government, it was a phrase he coined, and that invisible government, made up of corporate lobbyists and party bosses, the quote-unquote, we call them the establishment today, they are still in power over a century later. It's really sad for the country.
It is. And I believe as a candidate on the Bull Moose Party ticket, isn't he still the most successful third-party challenger that we've had yet to date?
By far. He captured I think it's 27% of the vote. He beat the incumbent president, William Howard Taft, who finished third. So Teddy should have been the nominee of the Republican Party, and had he been, he would have beaten Woodrow Wilson handily.
All right, we're speaking with the author of the new book, Theodore the Great, The Conservative Crusader. We can't have a conversation about Teddy Roosevelt without also talking about one of his greatest legacies, which is the national park system. You and I were talking beforehand. He technically wasn't the establisher of the park system, but certainly all of the great parks we have now owe an enormous debt to Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, the whole country does. That's one of his great achievements, conservation. He created 5 national parks. He created many so-called national monuments. And under his administration, he passed what was called the Antiquities Act. And the Antiquities Act was a way of getting around the lumber industry lobbyists in Congress who blocked, for instance, they blocked the Grand Canyon becoming a national park. So Roosevelt passed the Antiquities Act, which gave the president the power to declare certain areas special to the country as national monuments. So Roosevelt used that new law, the Antiquities Act, to make the Grand Canyon a national monument. And then I think about 10 years later, Congress finally got around to making the Grand Canyon a national park. But Teddy did so much. He really elevated the conservation movement, which at that time in the late 19th century was limited to wealthy outdoorsmen. It was really sort of a private concern.
That's one of the things we talk the most about when it comes to Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff that we don't talk the most about, however, are his legitimate credentials as a genuine conservative who believed in balanced budgets, who believed in a limited government. And those are the things that you talk about in your book.
Yeah, the book was really an answer to all the conservative, or I shouldn't call them conservative, critics on the right, especially libertarians like Glenn Beck and Jonah Goldberg and George Will, Judge Napolitano. All these people have really vilified Teddy Roosevelt over the last 10 years or so as the father of big government. If you listen to them and believe them, you would think that Teddy Roosevelt is equivalent to President Obama or Nancy Pelosi. And nothing could be further from the truth. He was a core conservative on so many levels, and I explain this in detail in my book.
Why is it that you think that there's this misconception? Why are these individuals attacking him? Have they? Does history lean in favor of their attacks, or what's the story?
A lot of this has to do with this word progressive. It's a semantic issue in a lot of ways, because Teddy, in 1912, as we talked about, he ran as a progressive. He led the Progressive Party's presidential ticket that year. But today, the word progressive has come to mean something very different. Back then, it meant a sensible reformer who was listening to the American people and implementing the reforms they wanted. Now, a progressive is someone like Nancy Pelosi or Barack Obama. And so the critics, I think, they conflate the term, and they don't know, they haven't read and researched Roosevelt in depth, so they make very superficial judgments about who he was and what he stood for. He didn't stand so much for increasing the size of government. He wanted to increase the power of the American people over their government. So, for instance, in 1912, one of the big things he ran on as a presidential candidate was to implement, give the American people access to ballot initiatives and referenda and the recall. He wanted the people to be able to recall elected officials and to recall judicial decisions. So these types of things, these measures, empower the public to control their government, not the other way around.
Radical thoughts for his time, and kind of radical thoughts for ours as well. Daniel Ruddy, author of Theodore the Great, Conservative Crusader, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Before I leave you tonight, my colleague J.D. Hayworth takes the helm with Newsmax Prime at 8 p.m. Let's all take a moment to remember the completion of the Panama Canal on the role that Theodore Roosevelt played in its construction with Newsmax TV American Moment. Thanks for watching.
It took 34 years to build, but on August 15th, 1914, the Panama Canal was officially opened for business and was quickly crowned one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. The 51-mile-long and 10-mile-wide canal was originally begun by the French, but abandoned after 9 years and the loss of over 20,000 of their workers from disease-infected jungles. President Theodore Roosevelt believed the completion of the canal was essential to American security and prosperity, so he negotiated with the French to purchase the canal's properties and dredging equipment. But when negotiations with Colombia over a canal treaty broke down, Roosevelt backed a local bloodless revolution that lasted only a few hours. And on November 3, 1903, the nation of Panama was born. With the opening of the Panama Canal, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were joined, reducing a ship's journey from New York to San Francisco by 9,000 miles. Roosevelt's vision made the canal a reality, and the feat helped make America a world power. You're watching An American Moment on Newsmax TV.